The rigged game ****. The air inside the Imperial Colosseum was thick with the stench of sweat, burning plasma, and blood, some of it human, most of it alien. Elias Voss stood in the center of the arena, his grip tightening around the pathetic excuse for a weapon they had given him, a wooden staff, barely reinforced. Across from him, his opponent loomed, an 8-foot-tall reptilian warlord from the Galactic Dominion, its 4 muscular arms gripping twin plasma blades that hissed with deadly energy. A voice boomed across the Colosseum. "Combatants, ready yourselves." Elias took a slow breath, rolling his shoulders to loosen them. The floor beneath him hummed. He had already noticed the subtle shift in gravity, making his body feel sluggish. It wasn't just in his head. The Zalzir controlled every aspect of the fights, rigging the very physics against him. Stay sharp. Stay fast. Think, The massive reptilian warrior grinned, baring serrated teeth. It tilted its head, amused. "You fight with a stick, human?" Elias smirked. "You fight with training wheels?" The creature snarled, insulted. The countdown began. 3, 2, 1. A deafening clang echoed through the arena as the gates slammed shut, sealing Elias inside with a monster designed to kill. The Galactic wasted no time. It charged, its plasma blades whirling in an intricate pattern. Elias barely managed to roll aside as one of the searing weapons slashed through the air where his head had been a second ago. Too slow. The gravity shifts were working against him. He felt like he was moving through molasses while his opponent moved as if the world was weightless. The crowd roared as Elias barely dodged another strike, the heat of the plasma blade singing his arm. He couldn't win this fight with brute force. He had to fight like a human, unpredictable, strategic, and ruthless. The Galactic lunged again, aiming to cleave him in two. But Elias wasn't where the beast expected him to be. Instead of stepping back, he stepped forward, ducking under the attack at the last possible second. He slammed his staff against the creature's exposed knee with all his strength. There was a sickening crunch as the joint hyperextended. The Galactic roared in pain, staggering. Elias didn't let up. He spun the staff, slamming it against the back of its skull. The impact barely did damage, but it annoyed the alien. Good. Angry opponents made mistakes. The creature swung wildly, its twin plasma blades carving glowing arcs through the air. Elias backed away, forcing the Galactic to turn and reposition, right where he wanted it. His eyes flicked to the ground. The arena floor had hidden grooves and channels. He had noticed them the moment he stepped inside. Now, he was sure. The Zalzir don't just control the fights. They control the battlefield itself. The moment the Galactic stepped into the marked section, Elias moved. He grabbed a handful of sand and flung it at the alien's face. It hissed in irritation, just enough distraction for Elias to slam his staff against the trigger mechanism embedded in the floor. A sharp crack echoed as a section of the ground collapsed beneath the Galactic. It stumbled, its lower leg falling into the pit Elias had just activated. Elias didn't hesitate. He drove his staff into the creature's throat. The impact forced its head back, leaving its chest exposed. One brutal kick sent it sprawling onto its back. The plasma blades clattered away. The Colosseum went silent. The Galactic gasped for air, trying to rise, but Elias was already on top of it, pinning its lower arms beneath his knee. He raised his staff high above its skull. A voice interrupted. "Enough." The Overlord's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Elias didn't lower his weapon. He looked up at the towering figure in the royal viewing box. Overlord Varzirik leaned forward, his violet eyes narrowing. A clever trick, human. But this was not a victory earned through strength. It was deception. Elias smirked, panting. A win's a win. The Overlord's fingers tightened around the ornate armrests of his throne. He did not like being defied. A moment passed. Then, "The human wins," the announcer declared, though the reluctance was clear. The crowd erupted, though not in cheers. Boos, jeers, and snarls of protest filled the Colosseum. The Galactic Dominion's honor had been insulted. Elias didn't care. As he stepped away from his fallen opponent, he muttered just loud enough for the creature to hear. "Next time, don't rely on the rigged game to save you." 2 guards approached, plasma rifles aimed at his chest. Standard procedure, he assumed. They would escort him back to his cell, where he would wait for the next match. But as they shoved him forward, he caught the briefest glance at the Overlord again. Varzirak was no longer merely annoyed. He was watching him, studying him in a way that sent a chill down Elias' spine. The Zalzir weren't just interested in his fights. They were afraid. And that meant he had something they couldn't predict. Something that might just win him the whole damn tournament. Breaking the system ***. The moment Elias Voss stepped back into his holding cell, he knew he had made an enemy of the system. The victory against the Galactic warrior should have earned him a reprieve, but instead, the guards shoved him inside harder than necessary, sealing the door with a mechanical hiss. He leaned against the cold metal wall, exhaling. His muscles ached from the fight, and the artificial gravity shifts had left his body sluggish. Yet, the real weight pressing down on him wasn't physical, it was the knowledge that he had painted a target on his back. The Zalzir had noticed him now, and that meant the next fight would be worse. The lights flickered as the reinforced door slid open again. Elias tensed. Another guard? A new opponent? Instead, a shadow moved inside, a tall, sinewy figure with pale blue skin and elongated features. It was a Druk, one of the many species subjugated by the Zalzir. The alien's narrow yellow eyes studied Elias carefully before it spoke in a quiet, clipped voice. "You should not have won that fight." Elias pushed off the wall, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Yeah? Tell that to the Galactic." The Druk's thin lips curled slightly. "You misunderstand. No human was meant to survive past the first round. The games are not about competition. They are about control." Elias folded his arms. "And yet, here I am." The Druk stepped closer, lowering its voice. "Which is why they will kill you soon." The words weren't a warning. They were a statement of fact. Elias had expected retaliation, but hearing it spoken so plainly sent a cold spike through his chest. He stayed composed. "Then tell me something I don't know." The Druk hesitated. "You are not the first to try to fight back." Elias narrowed his eyes. "What happened to the others?" A pause. Then, the alien glanced at the ceiling, a silent gesture. Elias followed the motion. The faint glow of surveillance drones flickered in the upper corners of the cell. Watching. Always watching. Elias understood. If the Druk said too much, it wouldn't just be him facing consequences. So he changed the subject. "What's your name?" The Druk's gaze lingered on him for a moment before answering. "Call me Taris." "Taris," Elias repeated. "You wouldn't be talking to me unless you wanted something." "What is it?" The alien exhaled, a sound more like a slow whistle than a sigh. "I want to see if you are worth saving." Elias raised an eyebrow. "And how exactly do I prove that?" Taris stepped back toward the door. "By surviving the next round." The door slid shut, leaving Elias alone again. He clenched his fists. The Zalzir weren't just throwing him into fights. They were testing him, seeing how far they could push before he broke. They were about to learn something very important about humans. ###the next fight. The Imperial Colosseum was packed again. The spectators didn't cheer for Elias. They wanted him to die. His victory had humiliated the system, and now, the Zalzir were correcting their mistake. He stood in the arena, waiting for his opponent. The air smelled of scorched metal and blood, some still fresh from the previous match. Above him, Overlord Varzirak watched with cold amusement from his throne. The announcer's voice boomed. "Combatants, prepare for battle." The gates rumbled open. Elias' breath slowed as his opponent emerged. A Vorik. Not a warrior. A beast. The Vorik was a nightmare-given form, 6 legs, thick muscle, and a hide covered in bone-like armor. Its 4 glowing red eyes locked onto Elias, and a low, guttural snarl rumbled from its throat. Elias had seen Vorik in action before. They weren't just strong. They were fast, faster than they had any right to be. The announcer's voice rang out. Begin. The Vorik lunged, covering half the distance between them in a blink. Elias barely had time to throw himself to the side as a clawed limb slammed into the ground where he had stood. The impact cracked the floor. No weapon. No armor. The Zalzir hadn't even pretended this was a fair fight. Elias scrambled back, keeping his eyes on the Vorik. The beast growled, circling him like a predator toying with prey. It knew it had already won. He needed to change that. The Vorik pounced again. Elias ducked, rolling beneath its underbelly, narrowly avoiding its claws. He kicked off the ground, sprinting toward the far wall. The crowd jeered. They thought he was running. He wasn't. His eyes locked onto the arena's upper levels, specifically, a large support chain holding up a massive decorative structure above the battlefield. A weak point. The Vorik roared behind him, closing in. Elias jumped. The gravity shifts tried to drag him down, but he had already accounted for it. His fingers caught the lowest part of the chain, barely managing to grip it. He swung forward, using the momentum to hurl himself toward one of the metal columns. The crowd gasped. The Vorik skidded to a halt, confused. This wasn't part of the game. Elias grinned. Good. He kicked off the column, landing atop the chain. It creaked under his weight, swaying. Below, the Vorik snarled, baring jagged teeth. Elias grabbed the connection joint of the chain. If he could break it. A sudden impact knocked the wind from his lungs. Something had hit him. A drone. Elias lost his grip, falling. He twisted midair, barely managing to angle himself toward the Vorik instead of the ground. The beast reared up, ready to catch him in its jaws. Elias let it. He slammed both hands against its eyes as he landed, blinding it. The Vorik shrieked in agony, shaking its head violently. Elias held on, gripping the creature's bony ridges. The drone had tried to kill him, but in doing so, it had put him exactly where he needed to be. He gritted his teeth, adjusting his weight, forcing the Vorik to stumble backward. The moment its hind legs touched the trap door he had noticed earlier, Elias jumped off. The floor beneath the Vorik collapsed. The beast let out a screech as it plummeted into the spike pit below. Silence. Then, the crowd erupted, Not in rage. Not in protest. In shock. Elias stood, breathing hard. He looked up at Overlord Varzirak. The alien's expression was unreadable, but Elias saw it. For the first time, doubt, A whisper reached his ear. Tari's voice. From the shadows of the arena's lower tunnels. You might just break this system after all, human. Humanity's secret weapon. Elias Voss knelt in his cell, rolling his shoulders, forcing his body to adjust to the artificial gravity. The Vorik fight had left bruises he could still feel, but he was alive. That alone made him dangerous now. The system had tried to break him. It had failed. The overhead lights flickered, twice, then once. A pattern. A message. Tari's was watching. The alien had said little after Elias' last victory, but the meaning had been clear. You might just break this system after all. And Elias intended to. The door hissed open. 2 armored guards stepped in, weapons trained on him. No words, just a nod toward the hallway. Elias stood. He didn't resist as they escorted him down the long corridors of the Imperial Coliseum, past cells filled with other fighters, some watching him with curiosity, others with something closer to hope. They had seen him do the impossible. Twice. Now, he had to do it a third time. The massive arena gates loomed ahead. The guards halted, forcing him to his knees as the announcer's voice boomed across the Colosseum. Final round. The human Elias Voss, unbroken, unrelenting. But the games of Dominion will not suffer an anomaly. A pause. The crowd waited, eager. Enter the reigning champion, Actron, the Devourer. The gates roared open. Elias stood as his final opponent stepped onto the battlefield. Actron was not like the others. He was Zal-Zir. 7 feet tall, clad in battle-scarred armor, his 4 muscular arms flexing as he tested the grip of his twin electroaxes. His black, scaled skin glistened under the arena's harsh lights. But what struck Elias wasn't the sheer physical power. It was the way Actron moved. Calm. Measured. No wasted motion. He wasn't just a brute. He was disciplined. Elias exhaled. This wasn't a monster he could outthink. This was a warrior. Overlord Varzirek leaned forward in his throne. Let the final match begin. Actron attacked the moment the gong sounded. Elias barely had time to react before the first axe came swinging at his ribs. He dodged left, only for the second blade to slice toward his throat. He ducked, rolling across the sand, feeling the crackle of energy as the axe head passed inches from his skull. The crowd roared as Elias scrambled backward, fists clenched. He had no weapon. No armor. Nothing but his instincts. Actron didn't press. He studied Elias, nodding slightly. You move well, human. Elias smirked. I get by. Actron tilted his head. Not for long. He lunged again, faster this time. Elias sidestepped, but Actron anticipated it, adjusting mid-strike. The axe's flat side slammed into Elias' ribs, sending him sprawling. Pain exploded in his side. He gasped, rolling onto his back as Actron loomed over him. Too fast. Too strong. No gaps in his defense. Actron raised an axe for the finishing blow. Elias kicked sand into his eyes. The Zal-Zir warrior snarled, momentarily blinded. Elias twisted onto his feet, sprinting away, forcing distance between them. Think. He couldn't overpower him. Couldn't outspeed him. So he had to outfight him. Actron recovered, shaking off the distraction. His expression wasn't anger. It was amusement. You fight like a cornered animal, Actron observed. Instinct. Desperation. Elias wiped blood from his lip. And you fight like someone who's never had to struggle. Actron's smile faded. Elias had hit something deeper than pride. The Zal-Zir champion rotated his axes, stepping forward. Struggle is weakness. Elias shook his head. No. Struggle is adaptation. He ran, not away. Toward the walls. Actron pursued, closing the distance with terrifying speed. Elias reached the edge of the arena, his hands gripping a discarded Vorik bone fragment, a remnant from the last fight. It wasn't a weapon. Not yet. He turned just as Actron reached him. The warrior swung his axe. Elias dropped low, rolling past Actron's legs. In the same motion, he slammed the bone shard into the warrior's lower calf. Actron grunted, stumbling. Not a fatal wound, but a distraction. Elias didn't let up. He grabbed Actron's wrist, the one holding the weaker of his 2 axes, and twisted with everything he had. The warrior snarled as the weapon dislodged from his grip. Elias caught it mid-fall. Actron's head snapped toward him. Surprised. Elias grinned. Guess what? Humans learn fast. Actron roared, coming at him again, but now Elias had a blade. He blocked the first strike, barely managing to deflect the force. Sparks flew. His hands burned from the impact, but he held firm. He had to. The battle shifted. Actron fought with precision, but Elias fought with adaptability. Each clash of their weapons sent vibrations up his arms, but he adjusted. He let the fight flow, weaving through attacks instead of brute forcing through them. Then, an opening. Actron overextended. Elias stepped in, slamming his axe's blunt edge against the warrior's exposed ribs. Actron staggered. Elias didn't let him recover. He hooked his foot behind Actron's knee, dropping him to one leg. Before the warrior could retaliate, Elias swung the axe, stopping it just short of Actron's throat. Silence. The entire Colosseum held its breath. Actron looked up at him, chest rising and falling. His expression wasn't anger. It was understanding. The announcer hesitated. Then, the human wins. The arena exploded with noise. Elias stepped back, tossing the axe to the ground. His heart pounded. Every muscle in his body screamed, but he had done it. He had beaten the system. Actron exhaled, shaking his head. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. A low, rumbling sound. He stood, rolling his shoulders. "You are not like the others," Actron admitted. "You fight with purpose." Elias wiped sweat from his brow. "I fight because I have to." Actron studied him. Then, without a word, he knelt. A gesture of respect. The Colosseum's energy shifted. This was no longer just a human victory. It was a statement. Overlord Varzirek's face darkened. He rose from his throne. "This match is void." Boos erupted from the stands. Not from the humans, from the other species. The ones who had seen the truth. The system was a lie. Actron turned toward the Overlord. "You call yourself strong," he said, voice carrying through the arena. "Yet you fear a single human." The Overlord's fists clenched. Elias smiled. The rebellion had already begun. The spark that ignites the fire. The arena had never been this loud before. Elias stood amidst the shifting energy of the crowd, his body aching but his mind razor-sharp. The chant began, not in one voice, but in many. It rippled through the stands like a wildfire, not for the Zalzir, but for him. Human. 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 It wasn't just the humans chanting. The enslaved, the conquered, the ones who had been told they were less, they saw something in him. Proof. That the system could be broken. Actron, still kneeling, turned his head toward Elias, his sharp eyes filled with something unreadable. Respect? Curiosity? Perhaps even admiration. But above them, Overlord Varzirek's face was twisted in fury. The control he had taken for granted was slipping, and he knew it. "This match is void." Varzirek bellowed. "This human, this mistake, has no place in the games of dominion. Guards! Kill him!" The order was absolute. The execution was immediate. The shock troopers moved in, armored figures surging from the arena's corridors, rifles raised. Elias expected it. The Zalzir could not afford to let him walk away from this. Not when he had shown their subjects that defiance was possible. Actron also expected it. The Zalzir warrior rose from his knee in a fluid motion, his massive form blocking the first few guards. The moment they raised their weapons, he struck. One brutal swing, a snapped spine. A blaster ripped from an alien's grip. The next guard barely had time to scream before Actron crushed his skull with a single, precise strike. The arena exploded into chaos. And then Taris made his move. A deafening blast shook the Colosseum. One of the upper towers erupted in fire and smoke, sending debris tumbling onto the guards. The crowd panicked, some running, others fighting back. A voice crackled through the comm systems, overriding the Overlord's command channel. "Elias. Move. Now." "Taris." Elias didn't hesitate. He grabbed a fallen shocktrooper's blaster, whirling around as another rushed him. One shot, clean, precise. The alien collapsed. Actron fought like a living war machine, carving a path through the guards. The other gladiators, many of whom had suffered under this rigged system for years, began to fight back. "This is your rebellion now," Elias muttered, gripping the weapon tighter. "Let's give them hell." Breaking the chains. Elias and Actron moved through the tunnels beneath the Colosseum, dodging gunfire as the rebellion spread above them. "How far is the extraction point?" Elias asked through gritted teeth. Tari's voice crackled through the stolen comm 1 level down. "But the Overlord has activated the lockdown sequence. You'll need to reach the command center to override it." Elias exhaled sharply. "Of course he has." Actron studied him for a moment. "You planned for this?" Elias smirked. "Let's just say humans don't fight battles they don't intend to win." They reached a reinforced blast door. Beyond it, the command center. The heart of the Colosseum's security. Actron stepped forward, burying both fists into the control panel. Sparks flew. Metal groaned. The door didn't just open, it collapsed. Inside, Zalzir technicians scrambled, but they were unarmed. Cowards hiding behind their systems. Elias stormed in, leveling his blaster at the lead officer. "End the lockdown. Now." The alien hissed. "I'd rather die." Elias' eyes narrowed. "That can be arranged." The Zalzir hesitated, then flinched as Actron stepped forward, towering over him. "You think your kind are gods," Actron rumbled. "But you are nothing without control." His words shook the officer more than any weapon could. A trembling clawed hand reached for the console. The lockdown sequence flickered. The arena doors opened. Tari's voice returned. "That's it. You have an opening. Get to the hangar." Elias turned toward Actron. "You coming?" The Zalzir warrior studied the chaos outside. His people, fighting and dying for a system that was already crumbling. "No," Actron said finally. "Not yet." Elias frowned. "You sure?" Actron smirked. "I have a war to start." Elias grinned. "Then I'll see you on the battlefield." Actron gave a single nod before turning away, disappearing into the conflict. Elias sprinted for the hangar. The future is human. The stolen gunship tore through the atmosphere, engines screaming. Elias sat in the co-pilot's seat, his fingers still wrapped tightly around his blaster. His body was wrecked, but his mind was clear. He turned to Taris, who piloted the ship with unsettling calm. "Where to now?" The alien exhaled. "The real fight is only beginning." Elias leaned back, watching as the planet shrank below them. The Imperial Colosseum had been a cage, a prison designed to break humans before they could ever rise. But it had done the opposite. Because the Zalzir had forgotten the one truth about humanity. We don't just survive. We adapt. We fight. And we win.